Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin, and I have a great guest, Rick Harrison. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great.
We get recognized everywhere. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. I mean, we were at Universal yesterday, walking through the park.
You think you know everything about spotting fakes? Think again. Even the sharpest minds in the pawn business, people who've handled millions of dollars in collectibles, can fall victim to expertly crafted deceptions that cost them their fortune. Rick Harrison and his crew at the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop have seen it all, authenticated thousands of items, and built an empire on their expertise. But what happens when the experts get fooled? Welcome to the dark side of Pawn Stars, where million-dollar mistakes lurk behind every confident smile, where authenticated certificates mean nothing, and where one bad decision can haunt you for years. This isn't the glamorous world of treasure hunting you see on TV. This is the brutal reality of high-stakes gambling with people's legacies, reputations, and cold, hard cash.
Little bit of job here. I started buying and selling stuff. Basically educated myself. And then I'd always been buying and selling stuff. My dad had a little coin shop, and I wanted a pawn shop.
The signature that destroyed trust. The shop door swings open on what seems like any other Las Vegas afternoon. The customer walking through looks ordinary enough. Nervous, maybe, but hopeful. What he's carrying, however, is anything but ordinary. Clutched in his hands is something that makes Rick Harrison's eyes light up with a mixture of excitement and suspicion. A book bearing the signature of one of baseball's most legendary and controversial figures. Joe Jackson, Shoeless Joe. The name alone sends shivers down the spine of any serious sports memorabilia collector. But here's what you need to understand about Joe Jackson's signatures. They're the white whale of the authentication world. Finding a genuine Joe Jackson autograph is like finding a needle in a haystack the size of Texas. Why? Because Jackson was illiterate. The man could barely write his own name, which means genuine signatures are extraordinarily rare, wildly inconsistent, and worth an absolute fortune to the right collector. And that's exactly what makes them the most forged signature in all of sports history. The customer doesn't just bring the book. He brings a certificate of authenticity. On paper, everything looks legitimate. The documentation seems solid. The signature appears right. For most dealers, this would be enough. But Rick isn't most dealers, and something in his gut is sending warning signals. Have you ever had that feeling? That nagging doubt in the back of your mind that whispers, something's wrong, even when everything looks perfect? That's the crossroads where fortunes are made and lost in the pawn business. Rick examines the book carefully, turning it over in his hands, studying every detail. This isn't just a signature. It's in a book about the dark side of sports, which should theoretically add value. The context fits. The story makes sense. The certificate backs it up. But Rick can't shake his uncertainty. "I'll take a risk at $10,000, Rick offers, testing the waters. The negotiation dance begins, that delicate back and forth where both parties try to find the sweet spot between profit and loss. The customer counters. Rick holds firm. Numbers fly back and forth like bullets in a shootout. 11,000, 16,000. The stakes keep climbing. "I'll make it short and sweet," Rick finally declares, drawing his line in the sand. $13,000. Not a penny more. If you ask for $1 more, you can take the book and walk out. $13,000. Think about that for a moment. That's a down payment on a house. That's a year's salary for some people. That's a life-changing amount of money riding on Rick's expertise, his instincts, and a piece of paper claiming authenticity. $13,000 if you accept, Rick repeats. "All right, deal." The handshake seals it. Rick knows it's a gamble. He tries to contact a specialist immediately to verify the signature, but gets no response. The experts aren't available. Time is ticking. And Rick has to make a decision right now, in this moment, with incomplete information. Does he walk away from a potential once-in-a-lifetime piece? Or does he trust the certificate and his decades of experience? He chooses to trust. He completes the deal. What would you have done? Would you have walked away, letting a potential gold mine slip through your fingers? Or would you have taken the leap of faith, risking everything on your gut instinct? But here's where the story takes a dark turn. After the cameras stop rolling, after the customer leaves with his 13 grand, the criticism starts pouring in. Why didn't Rick authenticate it first? Why did he rush into such a massive purchase without expert verification? Enter Rebecca, a trusted friend and authentication expert. Rick brings her the book, hoping against hope that his gamble paid off. She starts with the basics. The book itself has minimal value, around $50, even as a first edition. So everything rides on that signature. You either got a steal, Rebecca says, her voice measured and professional, or you got ripped off. Those words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Rebecca carefully compares the signature to one of the few universally accepted authentic Joe Jackson signatures in existence. She explains the nuances, how Joe's real signature was inconsistent and unstable because he simply didn't know how to write properly. An authentic Jackson signature would look unpracticed, genuinely messy, with the uncertainty of someone uncomfortable with a pen. But this signature? It's too neat in its attempt to look messy. It's calculated, practiced, the work of someone who knows what a Joe Jackson signature should look like and tried to recreate it perfectly. I'm not convinced it's real. Rebecca delivers the verdict that Rick has been dreading. Rick needs absolute certainty. He finally connects with a specialist who can compare it directly to a certified original Jackson signature. The analysis is thorough, painstaking, and ultimately devastating. The signature is fake. Completely, utterly, expensively fake. $13,000. Gone. Vanished into thin air because of a forged signature and a fraudulent certificate of authenticity. Rick is stunned, frustrated, and facing the harsh reality that even the best can be fooled by the worst. Think about the ripple effects of this moment. It's not just about the money lost. Though $13,000 is nothing to sneeze at, it's about the damage to Rick's reputation. It's about the vulnerability it exposes. And most importantly, it's about the erosion of trust in the entire authentication industry. If certificates can be faked, if experts can be fooled, if decades of experience can't protect you, then what can? The guitar that shattered dreams. The nightmare doesn't end with Joe Jackson's fake signature. In fact, the worst was yet to come, and it would happen not in the dusty backroom negotiations of the pawn shop, but in the bright lights and high stakes of a prestigious auction house. Julian's auction house isn't some small-time operation. This is where celebrity estates get liquidated, where movie props fetch millions, where the rich and famous come to buy pieces of history. When Rick decides to put over 100 items from his personal collection up for auction here, he's betting big on his taste, his acquisitions, and his business acumen. The cheaper items do well. The small-ticket pieces move as expected. Rick watches nervously as lot after lot crosses the auction block, but his real anxiety is reserved for the higher-value pieces. None carries more weight than the crown jewel of his collection. A Fender Stratocaster. Not just any Fender Stratocaster, but one with serious rock and roll pedigree. This guitar belonged to Big Flick, Rick had proudly announced when he acquired it. He played this Fender Stratocaster. Rick had paid $55,000 for this guitar. Let that sink in. That's more than most Americans make in a year. That's a luxury car. That's a substantial investment based on the belief that someone, somewhere, would value this piece of music history even more than he did. In the auction world, provenance is everything. A guitar is just wood and strings until you attach a story to it, until you connect it to a legend, until you transform it from an instrument into a piece of cultural history. Rick believed he had that story. He was catastrophically wrong. The auction begins. The auctioneer's voice rings out, starting the bidding. Rick waits for the numbers to climb, for collectors to battle it out, for that magical moment when two passionate bidders drive the price into the stratosphere. It never happens. The bidding stalls. It stutters. It limps forward like a wounded animal. Rick watches in growing horror as the numbers crawl upward with agonizing slowness. When the gavel finally falls, the guitar sells for just over $20,000. "I got my butt kicked," Rick admits, the words barely adequate to describe the financial devastation he's just experienced. Do the math. Rick paid $55,000. The guitar sold for just over $20,000. That's a loss of approximately $35,000 on a single item. But it's worse than that. Auction houses take their cut, typically 15 to 25% of the sale price. Factor in the buyer's premium, the seller's commission, insurance, and authentication fees, and Rick probably walked away with somewhere between $15,000 and $17,000. From a $55,000 investment to a $17,000 return. That's a loss of nearly 70%. That's not just getting your butt kicked, that's getting financially obliterated. Rick tries to stay positive, tries to maintain the confident facade that's made him a television star and a successful businessman. But the devastation is written all over his face. This isn't just about money, though the loss is staggering. It's about judgment. It's about the nagging question that will haunt every future purchase. What if I'm wrong again? Have you ever made a mistake so costly that it changed how you make decisions? That's where Rick stands now, questioning everything he thought he knew about the business that made him famous. The Fab Four forgery. The pattern is becoming clear now. Authentication is a minefield, and even the most experienced dealers are stepping on explosive after explosive. But nothing quite prepares you for the audacity of the next scam that walks through the door. A customer approaches the counter with something that should be the ultimate score. In their hands is a guitar bearing signatures from all four members of the most influential rock band in history: Ringo Starr, George Harrison, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, the Beatles. All four signatures on one guitar. If authentic, this item would be worth an absolute fortune. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly more. Complete sets of Beatles autographs are extraordinarily rare, especially with John Lennon, whose signature became tragically finite after his murder in 1980. Rick and Corey know immediately that this requires expert verification. The stakes are too high, the potential for fraud too great. They call in an authentication specialist who's dedicated their entire career to studying these specific signatures. The expert begins the painstaking process of examination. Each signature must be studied individually, compared to known genuine examples, analyzed for pen pressure, flow, characteristic flourishes, and dozens of other microscopic details that separate the real from the fake. What makes Beatles' signatures particularly challenging is that the band members signed so many autographs over the years that their signatures evolved and changed. Early signatures look different from later ones. The expert needs to account for all these variables while looking for the telltale signs of forgery. The examination takes time. Rick and Corey watch nervously. The customer watches hopefully, and everyone in the room knows that fortunes hang in the balance. Finally, after careful comparison to authenticated examples, after studying every loop and line, the expert delivers the verdict. Sorry guys, it's not real. 3 words. That's all it takes to transform a potential gold mine into worthless garbage. The collection is fake. A skilled forgery, certainly, but a forgery nonetheless. Rick and Corey are disappointed but relieved. At least this time, they didn't buy it first. At least this time, the expert caught the fraud before money changed hands. But the customer? The customer is stunned, possibly devastated. Did they know it was fake and tried to pull a scam? Or were they themselves victims of an earlier con? That's the insidious nature of forgery in the collectibles market. The fraud cascades down through multiple victims, each one convinced they're holding something real, each one potentially scamming the next person without even realizing it. How many fake items are circulating out there right now, being sold and resold, building false provenance with each transaction? The mandolin massacre. By now, you might be thinking that Rick is the only one making catastrophic mistakes, but in the pawn business, experience doesn't guarantee immunity from disaster. And sometimes, the biggest losses come from the least experienced hands. Enter Chum, the lovable but often overconfident employee who's about to learn an expensive lesson about expertise and humility. A woman walks into the shop with a Gibson mandolin from the early 1930s. Gibson mandolins from this era are legitimate collectibles, potentially worth thousands of dollars to the right buyer. But authentication requires specific knowledge about Gibson's manufacturing processes, materials, and design evolution during that period. Rick is away. Corey is unavailable. Chum is in charge, and he's excited about the opportunity to prove himself. This is his chance to make a big score, to show that he's learned from the masters. Can you feel the disaster approaching? Can you sense the impending catastrophe in Chum's confidence? Chum examines the mandolin. It looks right. It feels authentic. The seller seems genuine. The price seems reasonable. Not suspiciously cheap, but not outrageously expensive either. Everything appears to align perfectly. After negotiating, Chum agrees to pay $1,400 for the mandolin. In his mind, this is a smart move. He's secured what he believes is a valuable piece at a fair price, leaving room for profit when they eventually sell it. But almost immediately after the purchase, doubts begin creeping in. Did he miss something? Was he too eager? These questions nag at him until he finally does what he should have done before the purchase. He takes it to an expert. The specialist's examination is brutal and methodical, uncovering problem after problem that Chum completely missed. First, the label was cut out, a major red flag that suggests someone was hiding manufacturing information that would have revealed the instrument's true origins. Second, the finish is plastic instead of traditional varnish. Gibson would never have used plastic finish in the 1930s. This is an amateur mistake in the forgery, the kind of detail that an expert spots immediately, but that someone like Chum would never notice. Third, the pickguard is incorrect for the period and model. Another detail that requires specific knowledge to catch. The verdict comes down like a hammer. This is completely fake. The mandolin isn't worth $1,400. It's barely worth a few $100s as a generic instrument with no historical value whatsoever. Chum is left in shock, staring at the evidence of his catastrophic error in judgment. $1,400. Gone. Just like that. Because he didn't know what he didn't know, because he was too confident, because he made a deal without proper authentication. "I hate mandolins," Chum mutters, the frustration and embarrassment evident in every syllable. But here's the larger question. How many overconfident dealers are out there making purchases beyond their expertise? How many expensive lessons being learned the hard way? And how many scammers are specifically targeting these less experienced dealers, knowing they're easier marks than seasoned professionals like Rick? The pop culture paradox. You'd think by now the team would be gun-shy about anything requiring authentication. But the collectibles market doesn't stop evolving, and neither do the scams. The next potential disaster comes in a form that barely existed a decade ago: a Stan Lee Funko Pop figure. For those unfamiliar, Funko Pops are vinyl collectible figures that have exploded in popularity. While most sell for $10 to $20 retail, Rare variants and especially autographed pieces can fetch hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Stan Lee, the legendary creator of Spider-Man, the X-Men, and countless other Marvel characters, was famous for his enthusiastic interaction with fans. Before his death in 2018, he signed countless autographs at conventions and special events. His signature is common, but that very commonness makes it a prime target for forgers. A client brings in a Stan Lee Funko Pop, claiming it's signed by the man himself. Corey knows the stakes. Stan Lee signed thousands of items in his final years, making authentication challenging. But his signature is also heavily forged because demand far exceeds the supply of genuine signed pieces. They call in two experts. The first examines the autograph itself, comparing it to known authenticated Stan Lee signatures, studying the pen pressure, the flow, the characteristic elements that make a signature unique. The verdict on the signature: authentic. Without a doubt, Stan Lee's actual hand signed this item. So far, so good, right? The autograph is real, which means the item should be valuable, not even close. The second expert examines the Funko Pop figure itself, and this is where things get disturbing. While the signature is genuine, the figure is not. The expert points out flaws in the paint quality that wouldn't exist on an officially licensed, limited-release Funko Pop. The manufacturing quality is substandard. The details are wrong. It's not a real Funko Pop, the expert concludes. Think about the implications. Someone obtained a genuine Stan Lee signature, either through legitimate means or by convincing Stan Lee to sign a fake figure without realizing it was fake, and applied it to a counterfeit Funko Pop. This creates a hybrid fraud, a real signature on a fake item. What's it worth? Is it valuable because Stan Lee really signed it? Or is it worthless because the underlying item is counterfeit? Corey makes the smart decision and declines to buy it. He's disappointed. Another potential score evaporated. But he's also relieved. At least this time he caught the problem before money changed hands. But this case reveals something troubling about the modern collectibles market. Fraud is becoming increasingly sophisticated and layered. It's not enough to authenticate just the signature anymore. You have to authenticate every component of an item. How do you protect yourself in a market this treacherous, where certificates mean nothing, where expert opinions can conflict, where even genuine autographs can be attached to fake items? The million-dollar question. Let's add up the damage from just these cases alone. Joe Jackson book, $13,000 loss. Fender Stratocaster, approximately $38,000 loss. Fake mandolin, $1,400 loss. That's over $52,000 in documented losses from just these few examples. And these are only the stories that made it to television. How many other mistakes happened off camera? The pawn business operates on razor-thin margins. A successful shop might make a 20 to 30% profit on items when everything goes right. That means to recover from a $52,000 loss, Rick would need to successfully buy and sell approximately $200,000 worth of merchandise just to break even. One bad week, a handful of mistakes, and you need months of perfect transactions just to recover. But the financial losses aren't even the worst part. The real damage is to something far more valuable than money: reputation. Rick Harrison built his empire on being the expert, the guy who knows his stuff, the dealer you can trust. Every time a fake slips through, every time a massive loss goes public, that reputation takes a hit. And in a business built entirely on trust, reputation is everything. Would you sell your valuable collectible to someone who just lost $13,000 on a fake autograph? Would you trust their authentication process? The scams don't just cost money, they cost credibility. And credibility, unlike money, can't be recovered through successful transactions. It has to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, through years of consistent expertise and transparency. The industry's dark secret. Here's what the pawn industry doesn't want you to know. Authentication is fundamentally broken. Certificates of authenticity can be printed by anyone with a computer and printer. There's no central registry, no government oversight, no mandatory standards for who can call themselves an authentication expert. The entire system operates on trust and reputation, which makes it incredibly vulnerable to fraud. Expert opinions conflict all the time. One authenticator says an item is genuine. Another says it's fake. Who's right? How do you decide? Modern forgery has become so sophisticated that even the best experts can be fooled. Forgers study the experts' methodologies and find ways around them. They create false provenance, manufacture fake documentation, and exploit every weakness in the authentication chain, and the market keeps growing. As collectibles become alternative investments, as more people pour money into sports memorabilia and celebrity autographs, the incentives for fraud increase exponentially. We're not just talking about small-time scammers anymore. We're talking about organized criminal enterprises specializing in high-end forgeries. The Joe Jackson signature that fooled Rick, that wasn't created by some amateur. That was the work of a skilled forger who understood Jackson's signature characteristics, who knew how to make a forgery look authentically messy, who had access to period-appropriate books, and could create convincing certificates. The fake Funko Pop with the real Stan Lee signature? That required obtaining a genuine autograph and applying it to a counterfeit product, a level of sophistication that suggests organized fraud. This is the world Rick and his team are operating in now. And if the experts are getting fooled, what chance do regular collectors have? What this means for you. Maybe you're not running a pawn shop. Maybe you've never bought a piece of sports memorabilia worth more than $100. Maybe you think this doesn't apply to your life. Think again. The lessons from these disasters extend far beyond the pawn industry. They're about trust, expertise, and the dangers of overconfidence in any field. They're about the importance of due diligence and accepting that even the best can be fooled. If Rick Harrison, with decades of experience and access to the best authentication experts in the world, can lose $50,000 on bad purchases, what does that say about the rest of us? How do you protect yourself when buying anything valuable? The answer isn't to stop buying collectibles or to distrust everyone. The answer is to understand the risks, to educate yourself, to seek multiple expert opinions, and most importantly, to accept that sometimes you're going to get fooled no matter how careful you are. Rick's mistakes weren't entirely his fault. He took reasonable precautions. He sought expert opinions. He examined documentation. He used his decades of experience to make informed decisions. And he still got scammed multiple times for devastating amounts of money. That's not a failure of expertise. That's the reality of operating in a market where the fraudsters are just as sophisticated as the experts trying to catch them. The Fender Stratocaster loss illustrates another brutal truth. Value is entirely subjective and market-dependent. Rick didn't get scammed on that guitar. It was probably genuine, but he wildly overestimated what collectors would pay for it. He confused his own valuation with market reality, and it cost him $38,000. How do you protect against that? How do you guarantee that your investment will hold value when that value depends entirely on finding someone else who wants it as much as you did? You can't. That's the harsh reality of collectibles as investments. Unlike stocks or real estate, collectibles have no inherent value. They're worth exactly what someone else is willing to pay at the exact moment you want to sell, and not a penny more. The path forward. So where does this leave Rick and the gold and silver pawn shop? Where does it leave anyone who wants to buy, sell, or invest in valuable items? The answer starts with humility. Rick has learned, painfully and expensively, that expertise has limits, that certificates can be faked, that experts can be wrong, that markets can be irrational, that sometimes, despite your best efforts, you're going to get scammed or make a catastrophic misjudgment. The key is learning from these mistakes without letting them paralyze you. Rick could respond to these losses by refusing to buy anything risky, sticking only to safe, low-value items. But that's not how you run a successful high-end pawn shop. Instead, the lesson is about improving processes, seeking multiple expert opinions, being more conservative with valuations, and most importantly, accepting that losses are part of the business. You can't win every deal. You can't spot every fake. You can't perfectly predict what the market will value. What you can do is minimize risks, learn from mistakes, and maintain the integrity and transparency that build long-term trust. For collectors and investors, the lessons are similar. Do your research. Seek multiple expert opinions. Be skeptical of certificates of authenticity. Understand that even genuine items can lose value. Accept that sometimes you'll be fooled despite your best efforts. And most importantly, never invest more than you can afford to lose. If losing $13,000 on a fake autograph or $38,000 on an overvalued guitar would devastate your finances, then you have no business making those purchases in the first place. The final word. The million-dollar scams that hit Pawn Stars weren't the work of master criminals or elaborate heists. They were the result of skilled forgers, overconfident assessments, and market realities colliding with expectations. They were ordinary business transactions that went catastrophically wrong, despite reasonable precautions and expert involvement. That's what makes these stories so frightening and so valuable. If it can happen to Rick Harrison, it can happen to anyone. If decades of experience can't protect you from a $13,000 fake autograph, then what chance do the rest of us have? The answer is about the same chance, honestly. In a market, this treacherous expertise helps but doesn't guarantee safety. Authentication reduces risk but doesn't eliminate it. What separates successful dealers from failed ones isn't avoiding mistakes. It's surviving them. It's learning from losses instead of being destroyed by them. It's maintaining perspective and understanding that even the worst losses are just part of a longer game. Rick Harrison is still in business. The gold and silver pawn shop is still thriving. These losses, as devastating as they were in the moment, didn't destroy the empire he built. They became expensive lessons and cautionary tales that educate millions of viewers. Would Rick prefer to have that $52,000 back? Obviously. Would he make the same decisions knowing what he knows now? Absolutely not. But dwelling on past mistakes doesn't change them. It only prevents you from making better decisions in the future. So the next time you're considering buying something valuable, remember Rick's painful lessons. Remember that expertise has limits, that certificates can be faked, that markets are unpredictable, that even the best can be fooled. And then make the most informed decision you can. Accept the risks inherent in that decision, and be prepared to learn from whatever outcome follows. Because in the high-stakes world of collectibles and valuable items, that's the best any of us can do. The scammers will keep getting more sophisticated. The forgers will keep improving their techniques. The market will keep being unpredictable. But as long as you approach each transaction with humility, skepticism, and the understanding that sometimes you're going to lose despite your best efforts, you'll survive to make another deal, learn another lesson, and hopefully, eventually, come out ahead. Just ask Rick Harrison. He's $52,000 poorer and considerably wiser. And in the pawn business, wisdom might be the most valuable commodity of all, even if it comes at a devastating price.